The watchword of resilience work is to be ready for anything without planning for everything. Because we can't plan for everything. We never could. But to be ready for anything. Act in a spirit of hope. Hope, not optimism. Hope has to do with looking directly at the circumstances we are dealing with and still go on, because one hopes one can make a difference in the face of all that stands in the way of making a difference.
Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Commonweal. My name is Kira Epstein. I am the co-director of the new school at Commonweal. Today, we are delighted to welcome Graham Leicester. Graham is here with his partner, Dr. Margaret Hanna. They are our 2026 winter visiting scholars, and they've been here for a couple of weeks, meeting with our community and exploring the places where their work and our work intersects, finding resilience in these times. The conversation today will be hosted by our board chair, Katherine Fulton, and Oren Slozberg, our executive director, will be in the conversation as well. So thanks all three of you for being here. For those of you who haven't been here before, the new school is Commonweal's learning community and podcast. We host conversations and we produce them into podcasts, which you can find on the podcast media stations that you listen to and on our website. This conversation is part of a series of conversations that we're hosting this year, which is Commonweal's 50th anniversary year, which is celebrating 50 years, 5 decades of healing ourselves and healing the earth. And there's much more to do and much more to come. So Katherine Fulton, Graham Leicester, and Oren Slozberg, welcome to the new school at Commonweal.
Thank you. As Kira said, I'm Katherine Fulton, and I am going to host this conversation as well as participate in it with two men whom I deeply admire and also love. Graham Leicester had led the International Futures Forum for more than 2 decades, recently stepped down, which is one of the reasons that we get to have him here. And the IFF is one of the great centers of insight and practice about the future, and one that I've admired since it was founded at the beginning of this century. Oren, who many of you know, we'll get to hear from today if you haven't, is Commonweal's really gifted executive director, exactly the right person to be leading this institution now. The three of us are just concluding a quite remarkable 2 weeks together, a very intensive, most recent 6 days together, in dialogue with people that joined us, about another 24 people from around the country. And we've been exploring how to live and what to do in what has come to be called the polycrisis, the crisis of crises, all the complex interdependencies, what Graham presciently named at the turn of this century a world we do not understand and cannot control. The Commonweal for 50 years has evolved across time and changing needs in the world to be a flexible instrument of human service, calling on mind, heart, and hands, drawing on the past, serving the present, planting the seeds of the future in many, many different ways, now embodied in some 30 programs, always dedicated to the core founding purpose of healing ourselves and healing the earth. One of the core insights of the deep work that Commonweal has done across all this time is that healing is possible even when there is no cure. This, of course, comes from our long-standing, amazing work in the field of cancer with many, many cancer patients. But it applies equally now to how to live in a time of profound breakdown of natural, cultural, social, and political systems that we are all living through. In the midst of this kind of a multifaceted polycrisis, our deep purpose at Commonweal is to foster healing, resilience, and justice in multifaceted ways, because we cannot know, do not know what will be needed from individual, nurturing people individually, nurturing communities, organizations, and even larger systems. The programs that we have now all work independently, but increasingly are walking together in this time, because one of the things that we all need is to feel a sense of community and that we're not alone in this time. This is the second conversation we've gotten to have with Graham. I got to be involved in the first one, and this is his second visit to Commonweal from Scotland, where he is based in outside Edinburgh. The first conversation was in November 2023, which is not that long ago and is a really long time ago, given where things are in the world. It was posted to the New School archive in December of 2023. And I say that because I encourage you to listen to that conversation. It is a tremendous way to get a flavor of Graham's and the IFF's work over these decades. And that's about how that embodies both insights and tools for how to live and what to do in these times. Today, we're going to take up where that conversation left off, which is the other reason I recommend that you take a listen to it. The title that brought us together is Beyond Survival, Sustaining Human Agency in Challenging Times. We invite you today to join us in the act of re-perceiving. We're going to continue learning from each other and enjoying each other's company and invite you into that. And we'll all be in dialogue together. How do we hold and understand this moment as human beings? It is different in such profound ways than even 2 years ago. As I've learned to see and say more recently, it's not just about holding, but beholding the time that we're in with all of ourselves, with great humility and compassion for ourselves and for each other. And what do we do? What do we do if we desire to be of service? For some people, that's very clear. For others, it's not, or it's time to rethink. How do we show up for ourselves, to ourselves, and in community in a time of global polycrisis, especially if we aspire to be our best selves? There's so much in the current environment that brings out the worst in everyone and everything around us. Today, what we're going to try to do is show up here with each other and with you, and to reflect on that question about how to be and what to do in this moment. Together, each of us individually are in a quite new place than we were 2 years ago. Graham has stepped down from his leadership of the International Futures Forum and is in a kind of liminal space in your own life, which is why one of the reasons we get to have him here for 2 weeks. I'm in a new role here at Commonweal than I was 2 years ago, as chair of the board, and I'm also learning to live in the liminal space of a chronic illness. Mm. And Oren is leading Commonweal into its next 50 years, and drawing, forward all that we have learned in the first 50 years, but reimagining what does healing ourselves and healing the earth mean now? What's the same? What's different in this really radically new time? So I'm going to host and participate, but first I want to invite both Graham and Oren to introduce themselves more personally to you. What are they bringing into the room today? And then then I'm going to ask them each to talk about how they're holding and beholding the polycrisis, and what's changed for each of them as they have been on this journey, even as recently as the last 6 days. And we are going to give a bit more time to Graham. He's the new voice here. And Graham, as is his wont, plays with Post-it notes. This is a sheet of insights from his notes from the recent days, which I'm sure you will share some with us. And then we're going to take it from there with ourselves and with you. So, Graham, tell us, who is the person who shows up here today?
Which of my many selves? Well, the first person who shows up is not an individual. Carl Rogers talked about persons of tomorrow, individuals in relationship with others. So I turn up here in relationship with Oren and yourself, and new friends, Sharon, Mary, Susan, old friends, Neil, Karen, Anya, and of course, my partner, Margaret. One of the watchwords of the International Futures Forum is no solo climbers. You can't do this work alone. You need somebody else on the end of the rope. And Margaret is always on the end of the rope. And you could do that from thousands of miles away, but it's really helpful to have you here with me. And also, this is part of responding to the world we don't understand and can't control. It's too much for any individual to take in, which is why it's so good to have others in this conversation. And to know that you're not alone, and that your perspective is not the only one that counts, and is probably wrong, or at least partial. It will always be partial. So it's been really helpful having Margaret here for these 10 days, both for what she provides, but also what she sees, what she hears, what she passes on, and to have a partner to kind of debrief what we're experiencing together. I think those are, I knew that already, but it's been reinforced by being here in these circumstances. There have been some wonderful storms. It's been, this experience of living with polycrisis and talking about resilience. There was a great power cut. Was that Saturday night or Sunday night?
Just the night before last.
Yeah, but when was that?
Sunday night.
The night before last, there was a power cut, and which was, a great test. And we woke at about 3 a.m, listening to the owls, and it felt like you'd organised the dark night of the soul.
It's a standard part of the residence.
Yes. Well, it's great, because we need to rehearse that too. I make light of it, but actually, these are dark times, but they're also full of light. So I show up with carrying both of those. When I was here before, it was towards the end of 2023. We had advertised for a new director of the International Futures Forum at the beginning of July of that year. I thought at that moment I was a free man. I went off on holiday. And then the phone started ringing and people got in touch saying, tell me about this role. Can you? And I realized, no, that's not it. We've now got to be thoughtful about the recruitment process. Took a long time to design that and eventually appoint a wonderful woman called Rebecca Ford, who we were very lucky to find. And at that point, after she was appointed and accepted the role, was able to come here. And I thought, again, I was completing a journey. I came to see my friends and mentors, who I love and respect, including Katherine, met Oren, saw others who have been very important for my life's journey for decades. And I thought that too was a completion. It was interrupted because I tested positive for COVID. That's another sign of the times. So it was a kind of incomplete transition at that point. I then spent most of 2024 working in parallel with Rebecca to manage that transition, recognizing, again, no solo climbers. What is it that we need to preserve through this transition? How can we maintain the spirit of the work as well as the substance? This is turning into a long story.
It's okay. It's all right. You're our guest, and we're here to hear from you.
And the topic that was on my mind, just back to the substance, the topic that was on my mind when I came here towards the end of 2023 was the kind of coming out of COVID, so-called, emerging out of the mono-crisis into the polycrisis. All those things that have been held back whilst we were contained. trying to learn the lessons of that experience, that rehearsal of breakdown, global breakdown, and beginning to get into a circle that called themselves, that named this the polycrisis, although the wonderful Michael Lerner, who is in the room with us in spirit, always in the room with us, and actually was in the room with us at the start of the International Futures Forum. I enjoyed meeting him last week and reading to him one of his newsletters from May 2001 that had been fed into our process when we started in the spring of 2001. I had a brief conversation with him this week where he said, I'm not sure about this polycrisis word. It's far too intellectual, and I'm going to start calling it the mess we're in. The mess we're in. So I started mixing or getting into conversations where polycrisis or the mess we're in was the explicit context. And I went to a 5-day conference on the polycrisis in Denmark in the summer of 2022.
I think it was probably 2024, probably, wasn't it? After you were here?
No,
it was before.
It was
before you came.
2022, yeah,
Wow.
Yes. Which is why polycrisis is in the title of the last conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
But there was one person at the end of that, and we had the closing circle, and I won't name him, but he said, "What are you taking away from this?" We had that kind of circle, and he said, "From now on, when I introduce myself, I'm going to say my name is XXX, and I am living in a global polycrisis." He was going to try that on for size. And so I left that conference saying, that's a good idea. I'll try that. My name is Graham Leicester, and I'm living in a global polycrisis. So I tried that for a while to bring it to awareness for myself and for others. And my learning was, first of all, people would say, what on earth are you talking about? It was the wrong language. It triggered denial. Well, you may be living in a global polycrisis, but we're fine. The boat is not sinking at this end. And those that did say, well, that's interesting because I'm living in a global polycrisis too, it didn't lead to any kind of energy for a response. It led to a kind of, but what can you do? It is what it is. Always with that gesture of the shoulders, what can you do? So it kind of led to resignation. And I realized it was doing the same for me, actually, that I was using it as an excuse. Anything that happened, I'd say, well, of course, we're living in a global polycrisis. And so it was not energizing my own agency. So I stopped doing that and started looking for other ways of both speaking about this and engaging with it that would energize me and others. And that is a long version of why I came here and an introduction to what I've discovered in these conversations.
So we'll do that. We'll do that next.
Exactly.
So Oren, how are you showing up today?
I'm Oren. I'm living in a global polycrisis. That's a guaranteed way not to make friends. If the dinner conversation is going off course, let's talk about the polycrisis. Go silent.
Okay. I wish I'd known that earlier.
I was walking with someone here recently, and they were saying the hardest question these days is, how are you?
Yeah.
Because you can never say great, but at the same time, you also don't want to say, we're living in a global polycrisis. But it's, in a sense, we're all in transition and we're all in crisis. I mean, I grew up in Israel, a country that has been in crisis, which has gotten worse over the years. And it felt like a mono-crisis. In hindsight, it was definitely bigger than that. And I moved to San Francisco in the mid-'80s, in the middle of the AIDS pandemic. And that was also a crisis. And then we started to get the sense of something bigger than maybe just what's happening to us. And thinking about how did we move through it, it changed us. and it built community, it built awareness, it built collaboration. So when I think about there are no solo climbers, it kind of resonates deeply. And when we talk about resilience as a response to the polycrisis, we talk about there are not really islands of resilience. Resilience is something that happens in community. You could potentially build a bunker somewhere in Montana underground with 5 of your family members. That doesn't exactly seem like heaven for the rest of my life. So the idea that resilience is sourced in our community and where we come from, during the AIDS pandemic, that was powerful. It was a community that has been challenged for decades, oppressed. And during that pandemic, that's when the awareness became, this is not only about HIV and AIDS, this is about community, at the time the LGBT community. And it really brought it together. And it really demonstrated that this is not each of us individually, this is really the whole community coming together. And that's also what I feel here at Commonweal. I think it's we've been here for 50 years. Michael Lerner walked along the cliff not too far from here and had a vision, the ray of sun coming down and lighting up this old RCA building that was built in the 1920s. And he got a message of creating a place for healing ourselves and healing the earth. And in the first 20 years, most of the work was around cancer, working with people with cancer. And part of that is, how do you build the capacity to look into an unknown future? Especially back in the 70s and 80s, cancer has become more of a chronic disease than it used to be. Back then, it was definitely a question of mortality. And part of resilience was sourced in the capacity to look at what's ahead and not to be afraid to looking at what's ahead. That is a skill that Michael brags a lot about. I can look into the darkness, and he can. But when you look into the darkness, you also see the cracks, you also see the lights, and that's where I think resilience is sourced with. And the idea that healing is a way to move towards wholeness is not something I learned until I came to Commonweal, but it felt true. It felt true definitely growing up in Israel. It felt even more true being in San Francisco during the AIDS pandemic. It's like, we're not going to cure this thing. At least at the time we didn't think. It took time for the cure to arrive. So it's how do we live with it? And so there's that knowing is, I think, what helps us be here at Commonweal and look at the polycrisis. And especially in the last few years when the polycrisis has become embodied. Right, we had COVID, that was a monocrisis. Then we had the fires, that's another monocrisis. We have the deterioration of our coastline. One of the buildings at the end of this road will probably be in the ocean in 20 years instead of 50 because of rising sea levels. That's a monocrisis. You put them all together, the reality of it is something that we're living in now. And I think kind of my own resilience or my own capacity to deal with it is knowing that in the way this is a little bit the way of the world, it's a little bit on steroids now, but recognizing what does it move towards wholeness? What does it mean to be healed? How do you hold yourself when you have these things literally around the corner, right? The fire in Point Reyes was about 5 miles from here. So that capacity is sourced very much in community and the ability to look straight ahead. I think that's one of the things that's unique about Commonweal. So especially in the last 2-3 years, things have accelerated globally, politically, socially, culturally, that this has become a daily experience. And I'm grateful to be in this place where it actually, it definitely strengthens and brings a lot of joy. At the same time that we're facing a great unraveling. So when someone asks me how I'm doing, I can say I'm aware of where the world is, but today's a good day.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really interesting as we think about what we each bring and how you show up, I'm very interested in the difference in the way different generations hold this moment. So as an older person with a shorter time horizon in my own life, how do I think about what is my responsibility now, and to the degree that I can help and support younger people, but live in the present in a different way. And if you're younger and if you're in your 30s, you're looking at least half a century, right? How do you think about your professional life, your family, having children, all of these questions that people face, I think in the context that we're in now, that feel different than they did even 5-10 years ago. And one of the things that's going on at Commonweal is that same kind of intergenerational strength. And so my own sense is that we need all the generations. We need the energy and boldness and innocence, even naivete of younger people willing to just step out and do stuff. And we need the experience of older people, and we need all of the things in between. And we need all of that together. And one of the things that's really exciting to me about Commonweal, with 50 years of history, with a lot of younger people coming in now, that the chance to put these things together, to pull from the past, sometimes things that have been forgotten, like Michael wrote this thing in 2001 he could have said yesterday. Sometimes I've learned as a writer and editor, different things I've done in my career, sometimes the most important things are the things that end up on the cutting room floor that you need to recapture and re-remember and relearn. And so there are things both to sort of relearn. There's some things we have to unlearn. And there's a lot of things we need to learn. And by working in an intergenerational way, as we do at Commonweal, and as many institutions do, but it's a great gift to be doing it here, is a source of resilience in this moment. So, Graham, I want to turn back to you and ask you, reflect a little bit more on what you began to talk about, what shifted for you, but what new, even in your residency here, what's begun to shift for you in terms of the question that you came, remind us of the question you came in with. It was like, what does it mean to have human agency, and what does it mean to, where you started, what you were holding, and what sense you're making of it now.
Yeah. I guess what came out of the failed dinner party conversations was the question I came here with, because having had the invitation to be here as a visiting scholar, although I'd prefer to be the writer in residence, I think, just for...
You're the writer in residence.
A writer in residence. Because the thing about the writer...
How about fellow pilgrim?
Fellow pilgrim. I am a writer, and, I take notes. I can't stop myself. And a writer kind of notices things and then develops fragments. Some of them fall on the cutting room floor, and then they're honed together. And you never know what you're going to say. You never know where the book is going to finish when you start, which is like a conversation. You say, I love the idea of having this as a conversation. These are not conclusions. So I came with this question: if it doesn't work to say my name is Graham Leicester and I'm living in a global polycrisis, if it doesn't work to say, have you noticed the global polycrisis? Have you? I experience it in my life. I see it in other lives. I read about it, and the depth that you have to go to, really to be in it and to acknowledge it. I say it's a challenge to both theory and practice. So when the people say, what can you do? That sounds like a challenge to practice. I don't know what to do. But there's also a challenge to theory. I actually don't understand. I don't know how to understand what is going on. And of course, we are humans, so we want patterns of coherence. So we can fall back on the ones that we've already got. But actually to take on the challenge that maybe those are the ones we need to let go of, even at this moment when we're desperate to find something to cling on to. That's a real challenge. And maybe it's too much. Maybe it's too much to ask. I'm talking about the wise mentors I've had over the years. One of whom, Maureen O'Hara, I'll be seeing later in the week. and she's been working on, I mean, all of these people have effectively been working on the crisis of crises, the polycrisis, or the mess we're in, for their entire lives. And they've learned from people, I've learned from people who in turn worked on this for their entire lives. And it really staggered me when I go to someone like Maureen and she said, I just don't know what's going on. What was I thinking that I would have anything to offer at a time like this? And of course, that is what she's offering. That is what she's offering. That's what she offers me. All of that wisdom held so lightly in these times. So my question here was, how should I show up? How do I need to show up in a polycrisis? Now, I love this Commonweal term about being a flexible instrument of human service. Flexible instrument of human service. That's how to show up. So I've got an answer to that, at least the words. Yes, so how to embody that? That's the challenge. Another of my great mentors, Jim Ewing, could speak about any of these people for hours. One of the things he talked about 3 levels of advice. First level of advice, I need to fill out my tax return. Where do the numbers go? Yep, find someone. You can find someone who can tell you how to do that. That's fine. I'm a bit confused. I don't know what to do next, where to go in my life. I'm in a polycrisis. That kind of advice is not going to be of any help at all. So he talks about sitting with people and finding these frameworks that will allow them to find their own way, individuals, groups, organizations, you name it. That's not giving advice. And he advises. Before you go into such an encounter, write down everything that you might be thinking of advising. So you've got it out and you don't have to produce it, because you're there to be in support. You're there to be a flexible instrument of human service, as I've now learned. Then he has the 3rd level, where he says, you're sitting at the deathbed of a loved one. And I quote, this is not a Hallmark card moment. This is all you can do at that point to be a flexible instrument of human service is to be with that person as fully and openly as possible. And he calls that to be a transformative presence. At that moment, you can be a transformative presence. And he says, to be a transformative presence is the highest form of our art and should inform everything we do from the moment we start. So it's not that this is the pinnacle. It's not that this is the pinnacle of the art. It's that we are a transformative presence at all stages. So there's something about learning my way into that, or our way into
Graham,
that.
You worked with him and knew him for a long time, and he died a while ago. Mm-hmm. Can you think of a moment he did that for you, that he was a transformative presence, so that we feel our way into more what you mean?
No.
Okay.
I think the honest answer is no.
Or can you remember? Keep it in the back of your mind of from someone else. Yeah, I mean, so what you mean by that? If that's the highest art, what does that look like?
Well, if I knew that,
But I mean, if you've experienced it from someone else, a moment that someone was a transformative presence.
I think we're now into the mystical realm.
Okay.
Okay, so I have experienced, of course, that 2nd level of having someone hold me through learning and crisis over time. And these are kind of classic coaching roles, I suppose.
Yeah.
Having somebody with you on the journey.
So in a way, the transformative presence is walking with you over time. It's not just a moment, right?
Yeah, and I have sat at the bedside of a dying person and tried to channel what capacity of being do I need to be?
Yeah. right.
In healing
You know,
circles,
Yeah.
there's something of that quality. Because one of the guidelines for healing circles, which is an outgrowth of the cancer work, is no advising, no fixing. It's just witnessing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think Rachel Laramie Remen calls this generous listening.
yeah,
And in some ways, I think it's the second level.
Yeah.
But that leads to the third level.
yeah.
And I
That's
would-
more mystical, yeah.
Yeah.
So Graham, over this time here, was there anything that shifted for you?
Starting to talk about the mess we're in. Recognizing the usefulness of frameworks, actually.
Yeah.
Frameworks to hold us. I mean, frameworks are models. To make that distinction, a model claims to be, run the data through the model, and it's like a rehearsal for how the world will respond. It's a model of the world, and they say all models are wrong, but some are useful. I prefer frameworks. I like frameworks that will hold more of what we see, what we experience, different ways of knowing, somewhere to put all of that, to try and make some kind of temporary coherence. Enough coherence to make the next step. There's been a lot of frameworks in play in the conversation over the last few days. Probably not enough, actually, actual use of a framework to try and make sense of all of these perspectives in the room at the same time. We're left to kind of process it afterwards. So I think.
Well, and you've talked. You're famous for having worked with the Three Horizons framework, the world game that looks at all the different dimensions of the problem. Many different. There are also tools, to help. And you talked. We also talked about how useful it is to think about a field, and a field has. Tell the story of your son picking potatoes. That's such an interesting story.
I will embarrass him, but then, but he'll never watch this. So that's all right. No, I told the story during the last few days in the conversation, which was a conversation about field building. Is there a field of polycrisis response, or whatever we want to call it? And there's something reassuring about having a field. This is a field, you'd have to have a framework. I told the story of my son, who is living in a global polycrisis, like all of us. He's an artist and craftsperson. It's a struggle to make a living that way, and to build that kind of a life in this kind of a culture. Certainly where we come from, maybe it'd be easier to have that kind of a life in this culture here in Marin. But during the summers, he would in Scotland he would go and do agricultural work in the fields, in the potato fields with the migrant workers. And he said how comforting it was, how reassuring it was to work in a field, because it's got some boundaries. You're doing some real work. You're getting your hands dirty. It's agriculture. It's food. It's sustenance. This is life. This is life as I can understand it and I can participate in it. And then I have to go back. Into the world.
And the field had an edge. It had a boundary.
Yeah, it has boundaries.
Right?
Yeah,
You get to live in that field.
Exactly. And so what I was saying was, drawing on that analogy, having a field for the polycrisis will help us. If we're going to address it, there are some boundaries. It's this. It's not that. We're all in this. We're labouring. It's good work.
But how do you one of the challenges with the polycrisis is the complexity and the scope of it, right? At that retreat in Copenhagen, someone also said, this is just too big, this is everything, this can't be a field.
Yeah.
And there's the cognitive aspect of how do you hold it and make meaning.
Yeah.
There's the emotional aspect, how do you deal with an existential crisis.
Yeah.
And how do you define a field that includes everything?
You see, and what was coming through to me in our conversations was, one was the reframe of polycrisis as a condition.
Right.
Margaret's a doctor, Neil's a doctor. The doctors in the room will know that people now are not just suffering from one condition. It's not just one crisis. We're suffering from multiple morbidities, all kinds of different conditions all at the same time. Well, that sounds like polycrisis to me. As people were talking about the effects of living in this context, emotional, physical, spiritual, psychological, the kind of... I know that the cracks are where the light gets in, but they're also where some pretty miserable other things get in, as you well know. So it's a condition that we have to carry, that we're living with. We are living with this condition of polycrisis.
Yeah.
So how do we live with it, and what do we do? So
I was just going to say about the field. You see, we're the field of people, suffering from polycrisis, consciously suffering from polycrisis, and so that already unites us as a field. It's a different view of the field. We're not studying it. We're suffering from it, along with many others. And we have an intention, we have a shared intention in this field to address that and to take it seriously. And why? And I don't think I could have had that. I wouldn't have come up with that. I'm going to call it an insight, at least for me. I wouldn't have come up with that insight if I had not been at Commonweal. Because of this notion of healing as a movement towards wholeness, that's an intention.
Yep.
That is, so if you're suffering from polycrisis, try moving towards wholeness. So that it begins to define a reassuring field at last that can start to encompass everything, because it does.
In Chinese medicine, there's a condition called gu, which is not a specific diagnosis, it's just when everything starts to fall apart.
Right.
It's just like you don't know where to start. This starts and that has, here we might call it old age, but there's this, and gu is not correlated to age, but in some ways, the polycrisis is the gu of the planet.
Yeah.
And then you're treating that. There's a physician in Portland, Werner Heiner, I think is the name. He treats gu. He treats the whole system in a way.
Yeah. Well, part of what we've been wrestling with is Commonweal has had, on the one hand, all of Commonweal's programs sit within this condition, and address it in one way or another. But we're also wrestling with, are there new things that need to be done? Tad Homer-Dixon, who is a wonderful academic in Canada who at the Cascade Institute, gave a presentation here in recent days, and he said, as he thinks about, there have been many breakdowns of civilization and other times in human history. What makes this one different? He said that it is unprecedented. And for him, there were three things that were involved in making it unprecedented. He said, we now live in a planetary way with hyper-connectedness that was not present before in other times in history, the planetary level. He said, we have, an amazing depth of scientific knowledge that we did not have before. And we actually do have a growing awareness of a common future at the planetary level. We, as the species, as things like the pandemic, the climate crisis, no boundaries, and no political boundaries. And so the question of, we then watched a remarkable new collection of younger people in a Commonweal program called Earthkind, mostly people in their 30s and 40s, with a very long time frame, knowing that these things are going to take a long time. They're going to unfold for a long time. They're going to be living in that condition in all of their life. And that there will be shocks. Think about the shocks we've lived through just in the last 10 years. the major wars, the pandemic, the fires, the elections, and now, the shock that's coming from artificial intelligence, the various climate shocks, and that are going to continue. So we've been asking the question of, are there new things to do? That's why, so the question of, is there a theory? How do you base action? From a program, how do you be a flexible instrument of human service besides feel that you're in a condition? What do you do? So we've been wrestling with that. Oren, can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a leader, because one of the things you often say is, what is ours to do, and how you wrestle with that. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to wrestle with that as a leader?
Right, and that comes back to the question of complexity or the mess. I picked out the mess card from the deck. So what is the entry point? Is how do you deal with something that is so interactive on so many levels? Thomas Homer Dixon, TAD, did an analysis of 11 different variables and put them all into a computer and asked, what are the potential scenarios?
It's a model.
It's a model that has, I forget how many thousands of possible scenarios. So what are the
4 million.
specific points? How many?
4 million.
4 million. And one of them is good. So then the question becomes, is like, what is ours to do? Is like, when you're faced with the enormity of it, and considering who we are, where we're situated, what is the calling for Commonweal? And I think one of our unique things comes back to this question of healing and that understanding that we're not moving towards curing. It's a little cure to the planet. That's not going to happen. If we wanted to stop climate change, that should have been 1979, not 2026. So there is a question of, what does healing look like? What have we learned from our work in integrative medicine and with cancer and with healing that we can then apply towards the polycrisis? And I think that's kind of a fundamental question for us. Now, there's certain things that Commonweal does really well. One thing is to bring people together. We're situated here at a retreat center. People convene here, people gather. This land holds transformation really well. And a few movements have started here. Integrative medicine got a catalyst here. Environmental health, how toxins affects our health. That's another movement that started here. This land also held the beginnings of permaculture in the United States. So there's been a lot of ways in which just holding that space is a very effective way for us to move ahead. And there's also different technologies. Susan Gerlach-Houston, who's the head of strategies and innovation here, talks about what are the tools and technologies that Commonweal brings. And some of them is the arts. We're situated in a room here that I wish you could all see, and I would suggest going on the website.
We have the backdrop here.
This is a perfect example of the Omega Resilience Award, which is a global program that brings in the voices from Latin America, Africa, and India, from people in their communities who share stories of how the polycrisis affects their life. And Commonweal can help amplify those voices, but Commonweal also have ways to engage with art. And I think one of the unique qualities of art is that art is by definition is complex and mysterious. So when we step into an art piece like this, stories unfold in a way that a 3-hour lecture would not help us. I mean, just looking at this, there's a world that unfolds, and I think Commonweal, its visual thinking strategy is a way that that Commonweal can help bring understanding, bring connection. So there's a few ways in what Commonweal is called to do, and also to being a very nimble and adaptable instrument. So like being able to move on a dime. When there were fires in Sonoma County, we worked with one of our staff people, Amber Fowler, to set up a place to supply people who lost their homes. Or when we supported a shelter in Mexico for people.
So some of this is about having the capability to hold things lightly so that you can move quickly as needs change, which we assume they will. Right.
They change every day, yeah.
I sometimes in my life as a organizational consultant for, in recent years, helping people in philanthropy and nonprofits, I usually try to say to them, if you at all can, set a decent percentage in your budgetary process that is unallocated. And especially do that for your time. Because I can guarantee you that 6 months into the year, you will be doing some things that were not on your screen at the beginning of the year. And that has, so far in the last 5 or 6 years, proven to be absolutely true every single year.
Think where we were a year ago. Could we have predicted where we are?
I co-chair a local philanthropic fund in Sonoma where I live. And we just set our budget for the year, and we left fully 1/3 of it unallocated. Because we know that in a community that has 10,000 Latinos, 5,000 of whom are undocumented, the necessity of being ready for what could happen and the needs that could emerge that are impossible to see. We have to be ready for that. So how do you prepare in a different way? How do you not be exhausted?
That's resilience.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
exactly. It is
resilience, to
a
have those
kind.
capacities
It's a
to
kind
step
of
in when you need to,
resilience. And the other thing that's helped me the most in recent years in so many contexts where it's so hard to make strategy, it's like away from theory or model and you have to decide what you're going to do if you're in an organization. And somebody said to me a few years ago, the Chinese communists said, you cross the river by feeling for the stones. And that has meant more to me than anything I've heard in those years, because you just think about the image, you kind of know where you want to go,
Right.
where you'd like to end up, right? And so, but how in the world do you get there? So you take a step. I mean, you have to have the courage to take a step. You take a step. And, okay, then you get there and you say, oh, well, do I go there or do I go there? But you actually can't know that from the bank. You have to take that step onto that stone and then figure out which is the next one, right? And then you can make a lot of, you can go a long way on the journey doing that, but it is very hard from the beginning to say that.
But when you see people on the other shore, that also helps.
Yes, it does.
And in some
It
ways,
does.
we talk about the polycrisis here. There are communities in the world that have been in a polycrisis for hundreds of years.
Yes.
There's indigenous communities that have
Yeah.
experienced polycrisis with multiple vectors for over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So there are ways and learnings and knowledge in the world that can help us find the stones, even though you can't see them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, unless you're on that stone, you may not know that there's another stone, right? So I'm going to ask, before we open it up, I'm going to ask Graham to share a few more things, because this is the end of his residency, and we were wanting to hear anything he wants to offer it. Then I'm going to open the questions, and we'll continue the conversation. So, Graham, what else would you like to share?
Tell us all the truth about Commonweal.
Later.
Private.
No, it's emerging. No, I wanted to say something about capacities, which again has been a kind of theme in the last 10 days. What are the capacities that we need, kind of personally, interpersonally, intrapersonally, and in terms of kind of infrastructure and technologies to be ready, did some resilience work ages ago, and they said the watchword of resilience work is to be ready for anything without planning for everything. Because we can't plan for everything. We never could. But to be ready for anything, so that speaks to capacities and capabilities and investing in people and all that kind of thing. And I just there's this element of time. It's the 50th anniversary of Commonweal, 25 years of IFF. There's been a question lingering, and a number of the people who came in the last week for the conversation about resilience, they've been working with Michael for decades. And there was a kind of sadness in the room.
With Michael Lerner, yeah.
With Michael Lerner. As one, people speaking poetry at those moments. And one of the people in the kind of closing circle said, "This has been an opportunity to look tenderly into the dark." To look tenderly into the dark. And there's something about time there. There's something about urgency, and there was a theme in the conversation about, quote, getting ahead of the curve. I resonated with this other view that said, well, yeah, I remember sitting down with Michael Lerner 30 years ago. I'm in the Club of Rome, the global problematique. We were ahead of the curve. We were ahead of the curve. We saw all this coming, and yet, look, we don't have the lifeboats. So there's some kind of acknowledgement of the value of doing the work. The value of doing the work. My answer to that is, well, think where we would be if you hadn't done that work. We hadn't been ahead of the curve at that point. So there's a kind of forgiveness for ourselves that, okay, so how come the world is in such a mess if you've done all this great work then? And I think that will be true of the next generation and the generation after. And that is a capacity, the capacity for disappointment, and to still keep going. It was one of the big stories from this room about not giving up. Resilience is about keeping going. It will be hard. It will be a struggle.
Right.
There was a lot of talk about radical joy. The celebration and the dancing and the music making, which we've enjoyed over these 7 days as well. That's part of it. That is part of the struggle. It's not a relief from the struggle. It's part of it. It's part of the work. I didn't want to finish without reading again into the record. Maureen O'Hara and I wrote a book. Right at when did it come out? 2003, 10 Things to Do in a Conceptual Emergency, which was the end of the kind of first couple of years of the International Futures Forum. And I've been struggling with her and others ever since to write the one about 10 things to do in a global polycrisis. But actually, I discovered it's already been written. And another inspiration of both of us, Don Michael, his final, he was a social psychologist.
And he was actually quite close to Michael and Commonweal and the environmental health work in the 1990s. Exactly. Before he died. It died at the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So he died in 2000. Yeah. So just before the International Futures Forum began, and a number of people who came into the IFF had known him very well and said, oh, I think he's got a contribution to this work. And in particular, his final published piece was an essay called "Some Observations Regarding a Missing Elephant," and it was a kind of summing up his learning over a lifetime. And the missing elephant image was the blind persons and the elephant. If only they could all. I've got a trunk. Right. I've got this. If only they could see the whole, they'd see it's an elephant. And he said, no, that's no longer possible, because the world is so complex. There are so many fragments. They're all interconnected. They keep moving all over the place. Even if you could see them all, you wouldn't be able to discern the elephant. Hence his missing elephant. And he finishes that talk with 8 ways to respond to a human world that we don't understand and can't control. In effect, the world of polycrisis. And I don't think I can do any better. And I keep coming back to them now, and they say more to me each time I come back to them. And as I live more and more deeply with others in this mess. So I just want to share them. He says, these aren't in any particular order, though I think the sequence they are in adds a certain coherence. So first, acknowledge that we are unavoidably seekers of meaning. Acknowledge vulnerability and finiteness, both in ourselves and in our projects. Seek to live in poverty, not material poverty, rather to be poor in pride and arrogance and in the conviction that I and or we know what is right or wrong, what must be done and how to do it. Nevertheless, we must act. Not acting is also acting. regardless of our finiteness and vulnerability. Act in a spirit of hope. Hope, not optimism. Hope has to do with looking directly at the circumstances we are dealing with and still go on. Because one hopes one can make a difference in the face of all that stands in the way of making a difference. Act according to a tentative commitment. Be willing to look at a situation carefully enough, to risk enough, to contribute enough effort, enough hope to undertake your project, and to recognise that we might have it wrong. We may have to back off or change, not only how we are doing something, but whether we do it at all. Be context alert as a moral and operational necessity. Be a learner, teacher, a wary guide, explorers in the wilderness. Be question askers all the time, not answer givers. And finally, practice compassion. Facing life requires all the compassion we can bring to ourselves and others. The blind must care for the blind.
Let's take a moment to be with that. Don gave that talk when he was dying of pancreatic cancer. He was honored by Saybrook Graduate School. It was his final talk, and one of Graham's gifts to the world was saving that talk and publishing it. It's online. It's In Search of the Missing Elephant, it's called. I'm going to ask all of you to join with us in conversation. And Margaret, can I put you on the spot? Margaret is, as Graham spoke in the beginning, Margaret has been here with Graham through these days and in conversation with us. Is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation or a question or a provocation to offer to get us started in this next part?
Well, thank you very much. What an inspiring session we've just had. I suppose the one thing I'd like to add into it in terms of relatively recent experience of managing through crisis is the IFF response to COVID. So yes, it was a mono-crisis, but I think there are lessons here. And the first was what Oren was saying about being responsive, responding to that need of the moment in that community, in that person whose house is burnt down or whatever it is. Also to do a little and often, not to feel that you've got to come up with some great big solution, but to kind of keep feeding a line of or a direction of travel within a certain context, and build infrastructure. And I think these are three key areas where Commonweal could really start to evolve how it's working. And I too would look forward to hearing more how we can work with you to elaborate, more effective responsiveness to what we're going through.
Yeah.
It's just an observation.
So, I mean, part of, I think, one of the things that I took out of this time is that we've got to do two things at once. We've got to plant the seeds of how to build the world that is going to be and be beyond where we are now. We have to try new things, innovate, all the things that Don said. At the same time, we have to prepare for things for the disasters, the crises, have the infrastructure, the things that are. We have to do both of these things. We can't just do one or the other. So we have a question online. Great, thank you. Let's hear it from Isabel.
Okay, so this is from Ted. Much of the polycrisis is due to the incredible resilience of systems that maintain the current status quo. How do we identify their vulnerabilities that, when confronted and weakened, enable us to create alternatives?
So would you read that one more time?
Yeah, of course. Much of the polycrisis is due to the incredible resilience of systems that maintain the current status quo. How do we identify their vulnerabilities that, when confronted and weakened, enable us to create alternatives?
Yeah, so think about healthcare or education or many of the systems that we all live in. In the strategy field, it would be where are the cracks, where are the leverage points, where are the places for social acupuncture, as some language that are sometimes used, so that we can be ready for the moment when we can, in fact, when breakdown could lead to a breakthrough.
Maybe to add a dimension to that is also a lot of our institutions were built for a different time.
Right.
And we are now in a different era. So we do want to preserve the essence. We do need a healthcare system. We need an education system. We need a governance system. And then also ask the question, as the world is changing, what is the new education? This was built for the modern time. What would be, where are we going to, and how do those institutions, maybe this is an opportunity.
Right, exactly. I think that's the essence of the question.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of things occur to me, but what occurs to you?
What occurred to me first was the power of the powerless. Václav Havel and his essay, which of course Mark Carney has made newly famous by referring to it at Davos. So Havel was talking he was in prison in Czechoslovakia, and he was writing about how to be an agent, how to reclaim your agency without any power. And one of the things he says is he talks about living in truth. We have a choice to live in truth, and you can do that. Straighten your backbone. I mean, that was the point of taking the complicit sign out of the grocer's window. I don't need to put that up there. I can reclaim my agency and live my own life. And he goes on to say, and that will be powerful because it is attractive. It is human. And the so-called regime is human too. And eventually, at the moment, there are no cracks in that regime, but they will appear because you will be showing there is a different way of being human that is possible, that's available. So that's a completely different framing from where are the cracks and how do we exploit them and confront them to can we stand for something else? It's interesting talking to Katherine about philanthropy. There's a great evaluation by Rockefeller philanthropy advisors about their work to try and shift systems through philanthropy, and over 7 years. And one of the conclusions is it hasn't been as good as it could have been up to now, so what do we need to add to it? One of the things they say is choose what you stand for and stand for it. That's the thing about the Three Horizons framework, that the future grows out of our commitment to it. Yes, sure, we look for opportunities. We have to be ready. We're ready. When the polycrisis conference in Copenhagen, one of the things I learned from that was that it's not a collapse, it's a crumbling, like the cliffs here. Right. So there are opportunities occurring all the time, both to shore up what needs to be shored up because we rely on those systems, but also to be ready. But none of that, actually, in none of that are we undermining or confronting the present system. Not that that's not the right thing to do. Again, part of the conversation this week has been we've got to sound the alarm. We have to sound the alarm. But another poem, there's several poems get read over the course of our IFF gatherings. And I remember after 10 years, somebody brought Bertolt Brecht's To Those Born Later into the conversation. Oh, we who wanted to prepare the ground for friendship, could not ourselves be friendly. He talks about, anger even against injustice coarsens the voice. So there's something about being reflective about the world we want and the way we want to be with each other.
So, and to build on that though, it is not in opposition, but it is Also, the three horizons leads exactly to the part of the answer to that. The current horizon, the current reality we're living in is less and less
Yeah.
adaptive, is crashing. Meanwhile, you are seeing some of those opportunities, and you're building new things, right?
Yeah.
Toward a third horizon that you want to get to,
Yeah.
But part of how you may discover what those things are is by what do I stand for?
Yeah, exactly.
What do I believe?
Yeah.
And often those exercises begin with what is the third horizon? Not what is it that we believe? I'm going to get some more questions. Do you have anything to add? Anything else?
Well,
to
I
add?
mean, the other lens I was going to add, something that has come up in a lot of Earthkind and other events, is that we think often institution as either federal or global. But the question of what of those manifestations happen at a local level? What is a healthcare system? What is an education system? What is a local economic system?
Right.
So if you're standing up to your power in your community within a region, right? Could be a town, could be a state. There's a shift as well, because you can really stand into your power.
Yeah.
At the same time, recognizing we're living in a world that has supply chain issues
Yeah.
and global issues and energy issues.
It's a very powerful thing to say, yes, I am not in control, and there is much I can influence, right? And where I stand in the local place, and there is a lot. So here, yes.
Thank you so much. Much wisdom, very thought-provoking. Just some observations as I was listening, that the metaphor of the field and the metaphor of the elephant are actually the opposite of each other. And which is still useful. And may I commend you, if you haven't read it, and your son might be particularly interested, there is an essay by John Berger called The Field. And it is very wonderful. About the multivalence of wisdom, sort of the same thing, that crossing the river by feeling the stones, I just want to point out that the stones are not only the pathway, but they're the obstacles. And I thought that was marvelous. And that the polycrisis is nothing new. That for thousands of years, traditional Indian language has talked about the Kali Yuga. And I think that the polycrisis is just a manifestation of the Kali Yuga, and no excuse not for acting. Anyway, thank you so much. This was so wonderful.
Yeah. Anna?
Thank you so much for this. It's been such a joy to be with you these last couple days. I am thinking about how our systems that are crumbling are inherently, the majority of them, anthropocentric. And by definition, anthropocentric systems are not moving toward the whole they cannot be. And I'm curious, like how you, when you're thinking about from a horizon perspective or future perspective, how to authentically, not in just the theoretical realm, but in a lived way, be weaving ourselves back into the whole.
At this meeting that we talked about, there were 2 chairs dedicated to nature, bringing branches in, and a stuffed animal with an elephant, and a different story, the elephant in the room. But it did symbolize, and a lot of the conversations evolved around, how do we include that is beyond human? How do you bring in the natural world? I think one of the things about holding space at Commonweal is that you feel you're right on the edge of the continent between land and ocean. And that permeates the experience here. And how do you bring those voices into the room? There's also a little bit of the possibility of how do you use the human world to support the natural world. There was a wonderful attorney, Linda Sheehan, who talks about how do you give mountains and rivers their own rights, and then who represents them. There are, especially in New Zealand, geographical phenomena have their own rights, and the Maori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, are the ones that represent them. So bringing that to the table as well. But that is a constant narrative in the art around here, which you may not be able to see through the video, in every single image, the natural world is a key part of the interactions between humans and the world around them. And the polycrisis, while often gets interpreted as a human crisis, it is a human-generated crisis. It's a transition that's happening to the whole planet.
Yeah.
So holding that in the spaces.
Yeah. I'm just recalling. This is going to sound abstract to start with. A warning, abstraction warning. One of our other sadly departed mentors in International Futures Forum, Max Boiseau, he had a definition of wisdom, which was the depth and breadth of context you're willing to have inform your decision making. And so I see the move towards wholeness as a move towards a greater expansion of the depth and breadth of context that we're willing to bring to our decision making. I mustn't get sidetracked onto decision making, but that too is a Western frame. You know, the notion that you make a decision, that something has already actually moved in the heart and the soul before it gets expressed as a decision. Which is again another bit of the depth and breadth of context. So yeah, obviously it makes a huge difference being in this place, you know, rooted. Walking the land, the land itself is another pattern of wholeness. You know, this notion of the planetary age has given us a sense of standing on the same ground as anybody else anywhere on the planet. So you just reminded me of at our very first International Futures Forum gathering in St Andrews back in the spring of 2001. We had a deep, rich experience walking the beaches, doing all of the heady stuff, the heart stuff, getting to know each other, feeling our way into the messiness together. And then we went out and an official photographer came up, had been hired to kind of record this moment and got us all organised there. And we were standing on a grassy bank. And he went and there was a daffodil that was spoiling the shot. It's horrible, and he just went on. And we were all horrified. We were horrified. I can't tell you how painful it was. And we would not have thought that. We would not all have thought that. I would not have thought or felt that at the start of the week. So I think it's there anyway. It is there. We've just got to expand ourselves to allow it in.
And there's practices. I mean, it can be integrated.
Yeah.
It's like some of the best work happens when visiting the Commonweal Garden, sitting under a redwood tree.
Exactly.
Doing sit spots. It's literally going and sitting somewhere in nature so the consciousness of the world around us becomes tangible, so that when you go back into the room and you're talking about the fossil fuel industry and about climate change, you have a physical reminder of what does it mean to be in nature. I mean, this quote above us right here talks about the same thing. It's like the stories that come from the child and the grandmother and the elder are just as valuable as satellite imagery or spreadsheets. Because that personal experience, that being in nature, needs to inform everything we do, including medicine.
Anna, you're thinking about this all the time. Do you have an answer to your question?
I just want to acknowledge what a challenge it is, because I think we are so acculturated to that which is expedient and that which can be commodified, and we are accustomed to certain externalized or blind spots, or that which is messy or dirty. Plus, then you could think all about, like on a psychospiritual level, like masculine, feminine, yin, yang, that which is dynamic and outward versus, the dark, mysterious, quiet. So I just want to acknowledge that it's not easy, but totally essential when thinking about paradigm shifting, to have that in our heart.
And in our bodies.
And in our bodies. And I love thinking about, like, when you were talking about the different definitions of fields, I was thinking about, like, on an electromagnetic, like or electrochemical or neurohormonal fields that we I'm a physician and love thinking about what we do when we shift our own state of being. And I also love thinking metaphorically in nature metaphors and how, like when you're talking about the goo, that a caterpillar in a chrysalis goes a complete liquefaction process, and that there are imaginal cells that are resonating at a different frequency. And that, to me, that's something that I hold in my heart, like that's part of carrying these seeds, or is that resonating at a frequency for the future where we can magnetize or start to just be at a different frequency, but that it's not just metaphorical, it's also real. And that transformative presence comes down to, in my experience, holding a lot of space, that what we do with our energy body, and it comes like with the heart.
Yeah.
And so like for me, it's about field creation and moving in a different paradigm,
With energy.
and like intentionally thinking about how we're creating structures that are of the whole and are in community with all of life.
Yeah. So for those who don't know that, the person who was just speaking leads Natura, one of Commonweal's programs, and is the steward of the Commonweal Garden. So
Dr. Anna O'Malley.
Dr. Anna O'Malley, yes. We have one little fun thing to do to close, but I want to make sure there are any more comments or questions before we do that. Yes, we've got one right here.
Couple of comments. This was really wonderful, and I travel various places to hear Graham talk about pretty much anything. So it's wonderful to be here with you. Thinking about Edgar Morin, who is the philosopher sociologist who coined the term polycrisis originally, and one of the things that he warned was that you really have to embrace the complexity. That's the real challenge. And what we know about complex systems is that they move and change, but they can learn their way forward. And so part of it is a learning journey for the system and for those in the system. And that learning journey, that way forward, if you don't have an outcome to sort of focus on, it's very difficult to move forward. And if you don't have an outcome to resonate with other people, to sort of see and hold and believe and be able to move towards, it's difficult to move forward. And Graham and Margaret know this, that part of what I've been struggling with as a physician and public health person is recognizing that health is a industrial age outcome that doesn't actually work as the final thing that we want for everyone. And we've been thinking more that we need for this 21st century, for this digital age, a new surround sound outcome. And so we've thought about thriving. We use thriving not in a colloquial sense, but a technical sense that includes health and well-being, our capabilities, and our resilience. And it's the body, mind, body. It's the relational aspects of well-being, and it's the ecosystem, because resilience is not an individual quality, it's part of the context.
Can you introduce yourself and say what your project is, because it's very interesting.
Well, it's called the Thriving Project now, and we're trying to think.
And your name is?
Pardon me?
Your name is?
Neil Halpin. And working with someone at Penn, Chris Forrest, another physician, but we're really thinking about how do you embrace the complexity, how do you deal with the polycrisis, and how do you build a kind of transformational literacy that allows you to see the systems and see the points of leverage, the Donella Meadows sort of leverage points, but also be able to think about what the patterns of change will be and what the patterns of resonance are, the individual resonance, the resonance in groups and in places in order to move forward. And the work that we're doing now is in specific communities, around a particular outcome, oftentimes around children, about getting all their children in a particular community to school ready to learn their well-being, holistic measure, because it's something that they can think about together and move forward. So it's a practice that's very localized, but it's healing.
Right.
It's a healing practice, not a curative practice. It's something to heal together and to move together and to resonate together.
And your project is at Cal Berkeley, is it UC Berkeley?
I'm sorry?
Your project's at UC Berkeley?
Well, no.
Or it's at various?
Actually at UCLA, but we're working with the community of Pomona in Southern California and facilitating the process. We're also doing in the state of New Mexico with many coalitions, but it's a learning process. It's helping, and we do 3 horizons with these communities so that they can say, how do we get there? How do we help our children thrive? What does that look like? How do we see it doing? But it's exactly, along the lines, and the 8 ways that you talk about is part of the practice that we have to bring to that, and an awareness and a mindfulness of it.
It's great, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here. Got one more from Margaret.
It's just to say what a unifying thought it is to be thinking about our next generation and the one after that as a way of framing what we're trying to do here, rather than obviously to be present, but I think that future orientation is one that I could really buy into.
Yeah, great.
Sometimes I define Commonweal as a container that holds the soil where we plant the seeds of tomorrow. We may not know what tomorrow can look like, but we have a good sense of what those seeds are. And within the complexity, what you're struggling with is something we struggle with as well. This is a very complex, messy pool. And how do we access it? And my metaphor always comes back to art, because when you take a piece of art, it's inaccessible. When you have 10 people talking about it, the art piece unfolds. Everybody gains their own meaning. It's not like you reach a consensus, and it's not like you know every detail about the piece of art, but there are certain understandings that are sufficient to start the pathway towards healing.
Different people seeing and reperceiving. This is also a Commonweal program, visual thinking strategies that Oren brought in here. I'm going to close us in just a second and with a card. With a provocation card, which is one of the tools of the IFF. But do you have anything by way of saying farewell that you want to add before we do that? Because who knows what this will be?
Who knows what that will be? I don't want to say farewell.
Okay, good. That's good.
I want to say farewell.
Yes.
But
until again, yes.
Until again, yes.
Yes, until again.
We will farewell. But no, I don't want to leave, I won't be leaving.
These cards,
Yes, you will.
these are called the IFF prompts.
Only physically.
Okay.
This was part of the report from the original work, where they actually took things that people had said in these meetings and turned them into these cards, and they have beautiful art on the front. Here's one that has double hearts on the front of it. And you can do a kind of alternative tarot reading with them, which we have done in recent days in a wonderful way. I thought it would just be a fun way to close, to have each of us draw a card and see what it says. So draw yourself a card. Now you have to close your eyes because you know what's on all the cards. So you have to take a card.
Katherine, I'll create the field, though I'd like to hear it just from you two, but maybe we all could draw.
Yeah, we'll pass it around, but we'll have to close the podcast before that. Yes, you can do that. I'm going to draw one too. And you often these are often used when a conversation is stuck, or when you're wanting to have a little provocation yourself. And so, Oren, why don't you go first? What does your card say?
First, you show the picture to Graham, and he goes, oh.
What does your card say?
Dance, space, movement, do something risky.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I'll let you go last, Graham. Check out habits of mind and habits of heart. This one is question marks and hearts. Yeah, what is yours?
I've got a card I don't want. I've got a card I don't want, and that I've been questioning for a little while.
So do you want to draw another one, or do you want to go?
No, I will raise the question in public.
Okay.
So these are, as you say, these were developed in 2002. Only one has been added since. And there might be, I want to rephrase this one because it's got a kind of spaceship taking off. It says, cultivate courage and happiness in breaking rules. And I'm not sure that's subtle enough for this moment in the polycrisis. It seemed what we needed.
How would you change it now?
I think I would change it now. There's something about practice small acts of creative transgression.
Small acts of creative transgression. That's a good one.
Yeah, this will be edited, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's time to edit this one.
Yeah, that's it. That's, yeah.
We'll take a vote afterwards.
So for mine, cultivate habits of mind and habits of heart, I would have to say that the New School has been a place that has done that for me for quite a long time. I started listening to these podcasts when Michael started them in, I believe, 2007. So I want to say thank you for joining us for the New School at Commonweal. And thank you all that are here or all that are listening in real time or later. And we hope you'll join us again. Bye.
Thank you.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.
The river is a healer. The river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels no way.